Your world just got more complicated. What does it mean for Canada? What does it mean for you? Welcome to a special edition of Nature Labs. I'm your host, Simon Jackson, and class starts right now. Canada's sovereignty is being threatened. Our economy and thousands of jobs are at risk. The international rules-based order that has been with us since the end of the Second World War is in shambles. Absolutely nothing is certain. It's against this backdrop that our nation prepares to head to the polls. Canada's 6 major political parties are facing off for the right to govern our country and advance their vision to steer Canada through these troubled times. For this reason, many argue we're in the midst of the most consequential election of our lifetime. And if that's the case, we should probably better understand why exactly we're having an election right now, how it will work, the parties and candidates standing for election, and what's at stake in this vote. So let's get into it. We know when ungulates hold their elections. Elk, moose, caribou, and other critters, world famous for their hooves, battle it out each fall to see who gets the right to lead their territory. And yes, their version of leadership isn't quite the same as ours. But the point remains, their slightly vicious elections happen at the same time each year, like clockwork. And speaking of clockwork, we also know exactly when the United States votes for their president, once every 4th year. On the first Tuesday of November. But in Canada, and in all countries that use the British-designed Westminster-style system of government, it's not quite so simple. In theory, we do have fixed election dates in Canada. We were supposed to head to the polls this coming fall, but fixed election dates alone don't dictate the timing of elections in our country. After the last 2 elections in 2019 and 2021, the governing federal Liberal Party won the most seats, but not enough to form a majority government. That meant they were constantly at the mercy of the opposition. Think of it like this. If all opposition parties had wanted an election at any point after the 2021 election, they had the votes to bring down the Liberal government and force Canadians to the polls no matter when the next election was supposed to happen. Makes sense? Good, because this isn't the only way to force an early election in Canada. Both the 2021 election and this election were called by essentially the governing Liberal Party. After all, our Constitution allows the government to pull the plug on their own time and power. Why would a government defeat themselves? Timing. A governing party might be high in the polls, have a sense of momentum, or believe circumstances might change for the worse, meaning that right now offers the best chance of victory. And while that is self-serving, remember that no one goes into politics to lose. Everyone wants to win because, rightly or wrongly, they believe they're best positioned to advance the best set of policies to help society. In this election, of course, Prime Minister Mark Carney and the governing Liberal Party of Canada believed, rightly, that opposition parties were plotting to bring down the government as soon as Parliament resumed on March 24th. By calling an election before the opposition parties could have the chance to vote non-confidence in the government, Carney and the Liberals hoped they control the narrative going into the election. In our constitutional monarchy, Mark Carney, the Prime Minister, couldn't single-handedly call the election by himself. First, he needed permission. Mountain goats often live in herds. Where they eat, when they move, how they define their territory, it's a democratic decision. To a point. Because the final word, that's down to the matriarch. While goats don't call their heads of state kings and queens, this isn't the crown after all, this goat in many ways acts like a queen. That's right, the biggest, most powerful goat in most matters first must get permission from this goat in order to proceed. Which is exactly how our elections happen. Okay, their elections are a bit different, sort of. Anyway, like our goat friends, as you know, Canada's head of state isn't the Prime Minister. It's the monarch, the king. And the king in Canada is represented by the Governor-General, a position currently held by Her Excellency Mary Simon. As such, when Prime Minister Mark Carney decided that he wanted to call an early election, what he really decided was that he would advise our Governor-General that an election should be called. Once Prime Minister Carney, in person, provided an instrument of advice to the Governor-General Mary Simon, the decision of whether or not to call an election was in her hands. In theory. After all, as you know, the role of the king and the Governor-General in our system of governance is mostly ceremonial. The king and his representatives, both federally and provincially, almost always act on the advice of the Canadian heads of government, the Prime Minister federally and premiers provincially. Almost always. While the roles of Governor-General and Lieutenant Governors in our system are largely ceremonial, they're not not completely ceremonial. They do have real power that in exceptional circumstances can be used to deny the request of our heads of government, as has happened from time to time, both federally and provincially. But Prime Minister Mark Carney's request for an election was valid and with precedent, meaning that Governor General Mary Simon granted his wish and dissolved Parliament. Dissolved? Well, not literally, of course, but yes, in Canada, when an election is called, it's known as the dissolution of Parliament, meaning that all of the seats in the House are vacated and current MPs revert to being mere candidates. See? Parliament dissolved. And with the Governor General, again acting in the name of King Charles, executing the, quote, proclamations under the Great Seal of Canada, Her Excellency declared the election writs to be issued. The writs? Yes, the writs. This is the formal written order the Governor General provides to the returning officers in each of our 343 electoral ridings, ordering that they hold an election. That sounds like a bit of pointless trivia, sure, but what you really need to know is that when people say the writs have been issued or we're dropping the writ, they're just using old school Westminster slang to declare an election has been called. Take that, goats. In this election, expect rigorous debates and disagreements. There will be headbutting between policymakers, between voters even. And yes, given the stakes, the campaign has the chance to get intense, ugly even. No matter. Democracy isn't always pretty, but it is an important, well-thought-out process. How so? Well, for starters, Canadian elections are well-oiled machines, and they should be, given that this is our 45th campaign. Elections can last up to 51 days by law, but this one will be the legal minimum, 36 days, given the time-sensitive issues facing our nation. Is there a difference between short and long campaigns? Well, in a long campaign, people usually just start paying attention towards the end of it. Though the longer the campaign, the more chances for momentum to shift in either direction. Realistically, though, an extra week or two doesn't make that much of a difference. What does make a difference? The rules of what can and can't happen during a campaign. You see, in the pre-writ, that glorious pre-election phase, it's a free-for-all. Everything is allowed. Okay, maybe not everything, but a lot. Like parties with a significant fundraising advantage can spend as much as they want defining the opposition. But when the writ is dropped, all bets are off. It's an even playing field. Financially, at least. What is allowed during a campaign? Sign pollution in our neighborhoods. Also allowed, door-to-door visits by candidates of all parties, no matter how long their odds. And no matter how annoying it becomes, parties can phone you, text you, and email you. At least if you're unlucky enough for your details to have found their way onto a party database. Democracy in action! And sure, there are rallies that occasionally feel staged, and Burma shaving that sometimes feels creepy, and meet and greets that will inevitably create forced social awkwardness. But in each case, political parties are doing their best to get the word out about their candidates and the platform they're running on. After all, politics for most of us isn't our daily fixation. While we might be worried about this moment, the decision of who will help lead us through this crisis, for most of us, will only cross our minds but a few times during the course of this campaign. We've all got busy minds. We've all got other priorities. And sure, they might not be the best priorities, but it is what it is. As a result, the campaigning part of the campaign matters a lot. As the party that best cuts through the noise with a clear brand and puts forward the best set of ideas to address the ballot question usually wins. Say what? Well, you see, name recognition matters, like a lot. A candidate running under an established party brand, like the Conservatives, Liberals, or NDP, has a much better chance of success than an independent candidate with no party affiliation. And though independents do win, the examples are few and far between. Why? Because often people mark their ballot not for the candidate, but for the party brand the candidate represents. Which isn't ideal, but again, it's reality. So too is running a campaign built on a straightforward platform that clearly focuses on addressing the ballot question, that one issue at the forefront of voter minds. Sure, campaigns will make additional promises in specific ridings, often swing ridings, those close races that determine elections. But overall, the campaign that finds the momentum needed to win an election will design their platform and their communication strategy around a set of ideas aimed at addressing that ballot question. And momentum is a funny thing. One party might have huge momentum going into a campaign, then suddenly news breaks, and maybe breaks again, and momentum shifts. Suddenly and unexpectedly. But that momentum can shift back again. With a great debate, or with breaking news that reflects poorly on the candidate who had the momentum. Who's to say what will shift momentum in this campaign? The point is, though, campaigns matter, and no matter who has the momentum today, it might not be the party that has it tomorrow. Of course, for so much of our nation's history, the media has played a central role in shifting political momentum. But with the media landscape changing, increasingly journalists don't influence momentum to the degree they once did. It's now down to what the candidates and their surrogates say in TV commercials and on social media. Which brings us to what's not allowed in the campaign. Endless spending. Elections Canada, the nonpartisan agency that oversees our democratic elections, has rules about how much each party can spend and how much money third-party advocates can spend. Unlike America with their PACs and super PACs and PACs that seem super duper, we tightly regulate who gets to say what and how often during a campaign. In other words, activists and lobbyists and organized labor and big business and really loud tech bros can't buy an endless number of Facebook ads that will be seen ad nauseum by the over 60 set who still for some reason find value in Facebook. And it's also why every second commercial in Canada isn't a brutal attack ad. Ads cost money, and with only so much money to spend, political parties are forced to ration where and how they spend their dollars. Which is why Jagmeet Singh's TikTok game is so central to NDP efforts. Because even if you can only spend to a certain limit, not all parties have enough money to hit that limit. While political parties can borrow or go into debt to run a campaign, there are limits on how far into debt a party can go. But there aren't limits on, say, get ready with me TikTok stories, which sure, don't exactly address the ballot question, but aren't exactly unhelpful branding either. Social media and the uncontrollable algorithms that may or may not be game to drive voters towards one party over another is the big X factor. It's the wild, unregulated West, and it can be manipulated, even by other countries, as we've seen in our past elections and will likely see again. So yeah, social media is a huge deal in this election campaign, for a host of reasons. And it's also why each campaign has what's known as a war room. Political professionals who'll be working to spin every conversation in their party's favor. Is it unseemly to see an election as a war? Well, no, not really. Because as we've discussed before, political parties exist to win. They want power so they can implement their set of ideas that they passionately feel are the right set of ideas to help the nation. But it is up to all of us to know when we're getting spun. And it's especially important we understand when we're getting out and out manipulated by misinformation and deepfakes. That means double checking our sources, consuming election news from different sources, and asking the bigger, better questions, maybe even offline, and to our local candidates, at our door, or at an all-candidate debate, to make sure that we have all the facts, yes, the real facts, before we cast our ballot, or tell our friends and family who they should be voting for. And there are many ways to cast a ballot. Advanced polling, mail-in ballots. Most of us, however, vote on election day itself. In this case, that's Monday, April the 28th. And yes, elections always have a case of the Mondays, unless there happens to be a holiday. Why? Because it's nice to have something to look forward to on a Monday. Each riding will have multiple polling stations, with the aim of making the voting process as easy and convenient as possible, even if in some rural ridings it's still not that convenient. Of course, polls close at different times across the country on election day, and when they do, the deputy returning officer, Election Canada's point person, at each polling station in each riding counts the votes, with representatives of each candidate watching the process to make sure it's fair and transparent. I've done that job. It's about as exciting as it sounds, but it is important to ensure the vote is fair. The votes and rejected ballots are recorded on the statement of the vote and then sent to the riding's chief returning officer, who in turn validates the results. If no candidate disputes the results within 7 days of the election, that officer sends the final results, again on that election writ, to the Chief Electoral Officer of Canada, making the winning candidate officially a Member of Parliament. And the party with the most seats, MPs in Parliament, they get to form government, with the leader of that party, of course, being sworn in as Canada's next Prime Minister. You know this, but how about a refresher on who exactly is fielding candidates in this election? The heavyweight fight, of course, is between the incumbent Liberal Party of Canada and the Conservative Party of Canada, who most recently served as our nation's official opposition. In one form or another, these two parties are the only two parties who've ever formed government at the federal level in our nation's history. The NDP, though, is also considered a major federal party, even though they don't have a realistic shot of forming government in this election. And don't forget about the Bloc Québécois. Though they're a regional party focused on Quebec separation and only field female candidates in Quebec, historically they've played a major role in the makeup of Parliament. While the Greens aren't a major party, they did hold a couple of seats at dissolution, and they'll be fighting just to hold on to that beachhead. Of course, a beachhead is exactly what the People's Party of Canada would like to achieve in this election. If those are the players, what's their game? What does each party stand for? Well, to understand, let's remember this tool from social studies. It's the political spectrum, the ideological left-right axis. As you'll remember, if you turn left at center, you find liberal thinking. Those who are more focused on the collective good and believe that good is accomplished with the support of a strong central government. And that, in some ways, sums up the Liberal Party of Canada, also known as the Grits. In many ways, Liberals are like red foxes. For starters, they both love the color red. Why? Well, it's very on brand and stylish to boot. Red foxes are known for being smart like a fox, building alliances where needed to keep their place in the world, even if they're not technically at the top of the food chain. Liberals, like foxes, are also adaptable when required. Historically, the incumbent Liberals have been less ideologically liberal and more centrist on the political spectrum. But during their last 10 years in power, under the leadership of Justin Trudeau, the Liberals moved definitively to the center-left position on the spectrum, at times even overlapping with the further left NDP. That shift worked until it very much didn't. And with Justin Trudeau out as leader, it appears the Liberals will return closer to the center, focusing on economic issues. The ability to shift with political trends might sound like populism, but the Liberals are actually, at least in the eyes of some, globalists. What's a globalist? Well, think of hummingbirds. They're not satisfied with the status quo. They've got dreams, and they aren't afraid to work all over the world to make those dreams a reality. Globalists tend to believe in the global collective, aligning economic policies everywhere to help everyone, which is kind of left-wing or progressive, but this philosophy also supports free trade and organizations like the World Trade Organization, as well as free markets and private enterprise. Or in other words, globalists support traditional conservative economic policy and organizations that the left has opposed for decades. But the Liberals are hoping that globalism isn't dead yet, or at least that in the face of populist-driven headwinds, a globalist might sound more appealing today than it did a few months ago. While the Liberals tack to the center, they've left the left side of the political spectrum wide open for political parties that believe even more strongly in the role of government to ensure that society as a whole is equal. Who occupies this space in Canada? Let's start with the Green Party. They're kind of like Bison. Bison are all about the environment, but their numbers aren't exactly strong, and their hold on existence is a bit touch and go. That said, where they exist, they're loved, impacting life up and down the food chain. Similarly, the Greens wish they could be impacting races all across the country, but that's a pipe dream. Small in numbers like Bison, Greens must be hyper-focused on specific ridings where the environment is top of mind. And though they think they punch above their weight in Parliament and draw supporters from across the political spectrum, more often than not, they're a protest vote, firmly planted on the left side of the political spectrum. Will the Greens be able to retain their seats or even grow their caucus? We'll see, but the very existence of the Greens definitely eats into the NDP vote. The NDP has always been left-wing. It was a party of the rural working class, starting as a farmer labor party by Tommy Douglas in Saskatchewan. Today, though, the NDP is trying to be an urban social justice, environmentalist party, as well as the party of worker rights, which sounds a lot like the Badger. Prairie origins, scrappy, defends its territory fiercely from foxes. But as the country has changed, Badgers have had to leave their traditional roots, finding new purpose in the landscape, which is never easy, and at times has led to problems. The federal NDP is no different, struggling to maintain relevance in a changing political climate. That's in part because environmental and social justice issues don't always play nicely in the sandbox with labor issues. It's possible that in trying to be too many things to too many people, that the NDP gets squeezed in this election, and could even lose official party status. That key designation that gives a party resources, staff, power, and influence over the agenda in Parliament. So who will be squeezing the NDP in this election? Well, the Liberals for starters. Even with their recent shift to the middle, voters who really don't like the Conservatives will view the Liberals as the lesser of evils, voting strategically in key swing ridings. And while strategic voting is controversial, it doesn't stop some from embracing it and the Liberals from benefiting from it. Such foxes. But the Conservatives are also poised to squeeze the NDP. Today's Conservatives, in many ways, are like Blue Jays. not the baseball team, or at least they hope they're not like the baseball team in this election. No, conservatives, also known as Tories, are like Blue Jays because they tend to be traditionalists who embrace the rights of the individual and because they believe in living within their means. And just as Blue Jays can adapt to different habitats without becoming reliant on handouts, conservatives believe free enterprise, not government handouts, is what can help address problems in society. Conservatives also believe in empowering the provinces and their regional values rather than creating a strong centralized government, which I guess is like a Blue Jay. Anyway, while all of this firmly places the conservatives on the right side of the political spectrum, they are increasingly embracing populist policies that appeal to union workers, the traditional voting base of the NDP. It's a strategic move because in many rural parts of the country, races are between the conservatives and the NDP, not liberals and conservatives. And though it might seem odd that voters can swing between two parties perceived to be at wildly different ends of the political spectrum, the reality is, these voters have a common cause in being anti-establishment. And anti-establishment, that's the definition of populism. Populists, as you'll remember, are anti-globalist and most certainly anti-elite. Political populists, if we're being honest, are often defined as being opportunists, which sounds bad until you realize, like Blue Jays and their opportunistic feeding practices, is really just about responding to survival fears. Now, populism can materialize on the left, wealth redistribution, say through higher wages for blue-collar workers, or it can also be found on the right. Anti-tax campaigns, for example. In both cases, though, populists champion the rights of the individual over those of the state or the corporation. Rather than being the party of corporate Canada, the conservatives are trying to be the party of the individual, whether that's a wealthy tech innovator or a blue-collar worker, promising to remove any gatekeepers, the establishment, who might be impacting their ability to succeed. And the conservatives were onto something. Many countries the world over have been rebelling against the establishment for not doing enough to address quality of life issues like housing and cost of living, as former Canadian Conservative Prime Minister Stephen Harper illustrated in his book Right Here, Right Now. Quote, "Conservatives won the Cold War. Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, and their generation stood against communism abroad and socialism at home, and they were largely successful. Our values, free societies, free markets, free trade, free movement, have spread around the world. The problem is this: globalization has been very successful for many of the world's people, but not so much for many of our own. 1 billion people worldwide, mostly in the emerging economies of Asia, have moved out of poverty. Yet in many Western countries, the incomes of working people have stagnated, or even declined, over the past quarter century. This is especially true in the United States. Trump clearly understood this." Harper was right. This might be where the votes were. But is he still right? This election will be interesting to watch for this reason alone. Certainly many Western democracies have embraced populism, but since it's populism that drove Trump to the White House, that means it's also populism that has given rise to a global trade war and threats to Canada's sovereignty. As such, populism might not be seen as favorably in this moment as it was just a few months ago. How will this reality impact the Conservatives' fortunes? Stay tuned. Now you're up to speed on the main national contenders, but there are more contenders in this race, and other political voices who will have a big say in this election and what comes next for Canada. Salmon are noble creatures. They work hard, they punch above their weight, or at least I'd like to think so. They're humble, even when helping sustain globally important environments while creating a livable home for countless species. But they're still salmon, and when the grizzly bear comes strolling down the river, there is only one focus: survival. This, of course, is a metaphor. The grizzly in this case is America. It's big and it can't be ignored. It's the predator that is threatening our very existence. And like the salmon stream with Trump in the White House, this election is focused on one issue and one issue only: who best can respond to President Trump's threats to our economy and our sovereignty. Understand that Trump has already damaged the Canadian economy. His on-again, off-again tariffs and threats of tariffs have created a level of uncertainty that is pushing our nation into recession, an economic downward spiral. Why? Well, America is our largest trading partner, and because we are a trading nation, demand for our goods and services have already decreased. The goods we import are suddenly more expensive as well. Supply chains, a mess since COVID, have become even more complicated. Inflation is increasing. Jobs are being lost. Companies are moving out of the country. The dollar is collapsing. Investment is drying up. The future of our economy is in question. And this is to say nothing of Trump's threats to annex Canada, making our nation America's 51st state through economic force. These are serious issues. People are scared for their jobs. They're worried about keeping their homes and how they'll manage to put food on the table. And when you factor in how America is treating Greenland and the Ukraine, it's not hard to fear for the future of our nation. This has led to a vast outpouring of national pride. Pride that seemed to evaporate shortly after Sidney Crosby's golden goal at the 2010 Winter Olympic Games in Vancouver, only to return with McDavid's golden goal at the Four Nations tournament this past February. Suddenly we're all on Team Canada, channeling our love of hockey, embracing an elbows-up mentality with America. But here's the thing, how unified are we? Yes, the country broadly understands the risks and is wholeheartedly embraced by Canadian and staycations. But the regional divides that have long plagued this country, they still exist. And Trump's threats, this election may yet reveal divisions that our current nationalistic fervor might only be temporarily masking. Nationalism, the love and desire to protect a culture from outside influence, isn't new to Canada. It's been alive and well in Quebec in many ways since before Confederation. And since the 1990s, the Bloc Québécois has acted as Quebec's nationalist party, with a Quebec first and in many ways Quebec independence focus. The French-English divide, exemplified by the Bloc, has defined so many of Canada's national unity debates. Will it continue to define our debates? Good question. In this election, we'll see if Quebec voters continue to embrace the Bloc to the same levels as past elections, given Trump's threats. If they do, and with the provincial separatist Parti Québécois high in the polls, it's possible we could be moving towards yet another Quebec referendum, at a time when our nation needs to be united. But if they don't, Quebec separatism might go into hibernation. That might be an opportunity. It also might lull Canada into a sense of complacency. Something to watch, to be sure. But Quebec isn't the only front in Canada's national unity debates. Regional nationalism also exists in the West. In Alberta and Saskatchewan and parts of northeastern BC, nationalistic tendencies have led voters to embracing parties and leaders of parties who are more conservative than the traditional federal conservative option. Think the once upon a time Social Credit, Reform, and Canadian Alliance parties, all of which were more populist and nationalistic than the former Progressive Conservative Party. But since the Canadian Alliance and Progressive Conservatives merged under Stephen Harper to unite the right, more strident nationalistic tendencies are why some voters no longer feel at home in the Conservative Party and have moved to the harder right-wing People's Party of Canada, a party that has more support in the prairies than anywhere else. Will the PPC be able to break through this election? Or will it be Pierre Poilievre who proves to be the leader who can bring the prairie nationalist into the Conservative Party tent? And then there's this question. The populist nationalist Premier of Alberta, Danielle Smith, has already gone on record with a series of demands for the next Prime Minister. Now Canadians, at least in recent weeks, have softened to the demands from the West. Pipelines, long a controversial issue in this country, seem to be gaining support everywhere in light of the trade war. But it's also likely that broad Canadian goodwill only extends so far, and doesn't encompass every demand that Premier Smith has articulated. What happens when demands aren't met? Well, before we answer that question, first a little context might help. Alberta, due to geography, economics, and culture, has always been a political outsider in our federal politics. They feel, as a province, they've had to fight for everything they have. And while that's a regional perception, it's also fact. Moreover, Alberta's fighting spirit, its ability to carve out an oil and gas economy from the boggy boreal forest in the northeast corner of the province, has brought incredible prosperity to all of Canada. And at times, Alberta has delivered Canadian prosperity at the expense of, well, Albertans. Now here's the flip side. With economic opportunity, Alberta also gave the nation an unpaid environmental bill. And even though Alberta's share of the global climate crisis is very much up for debate, what's not up for discussion is that the importance of tackling climate change is important to many Canadians for environmental and economic reasons. BC's recent cycle of fires, landslides, and floods have disrupted supply chains, hurt efforts to tackle inflation, and cost the country billions of dollars. On both counts, we're not talking about obscure history. Tangible current events are coloring how different regions judge each other, and how each region believes we should react to the very black and white reality of Trump's threats. For Premier Smith and much of the Prairie West, the Trump tariff threat is just another front in an ongoing battle to keep the oil and gas sector healthy and thriving. The province, unlike Ontario, say, is not as economically diversified. And while short-term politics have played a role in this reality, it's also a byproduct of Alberta's geography. It's nowhere close to power and population centers, Canadian or American. That's why, if polls are to be believed, many Albertans are only on Team Canada so long as Team Canada embraces Alberta's oil and doesn't use it to retaliate in the trade war. But unity, we often forget, is a two-way street. Many Canadians perceive Premier Smith to be anti-Canadian, giving controversial interviews to the US media and lobbying President Trump directly, with the support of a business leader who has openly called for Canada to become America's 51st state. And though Premier Smith isn't anti-Canadian, she's pro-Alberta, which is her job. Her actions play into a long-running narrative about the province. That reputation isn't often deserved, but just as Canada can be tone-deaf to Alberta's needs, Alberta can be a bit tone-deaf to the rest of Canada. Instead of addressing the concerns of Canadian provinces who opposed previous pipeline proposals, Alberta fought and demonized the positions of those who disagreed with them. And maybe more Canadians would cut Alberta slack on pipelines if, say, the province was taking action to help meet national biodiversity goals. Instead, the province is pushing forward with strict coal mining in sensitive wildlife habitat, has created an open season on threatened species like wolverines, and has okayed wolf killing competitions. As we've said over and over, when the other side can't see themselves in a set of solutions on offer, it's hard to find an ally when it really matters. Premier Smith isn't a candidate in this election, but her shadow looms large. The demands she tabled, the federal Conservatives have seemingly embraced them. And then there is Mark Carney and the Liberals. They haven't promised to enact all of Smith's demands. And according to the Premier, if the next federal government isn't all in on her demands, Canada will face an unprecedented national unity crisis and a possible referendum on Alberta's independence. Already facing down one blackmail threat, how will the nation respond to another, especially from one within our borders? And then there's this. If we don't take Alberta's demands seriously, if the rest of Canada feels Smith is overplaying her cards and not doing enough to reflect the values held by others, what does that mean for our country? Don't forget, Western alienation isn't new. It led to the creation of the Reform Party way back in 1987. That movement didn't advocate for separation. Rather, it pushed for the national conservative movement to embrace more of its ideas and policy positions. They succeeded. But if the Conservatives don't win this election, running on a prairie populist plan, how will the West react? Will a new prairie populist movement take shape in the wake of a loss? And this time, will it advocate for independence, or even for Alberta to become the 51st US state? Without question, this election is about Donald Trump, his trade war, and his threats to our sovereignty. But it's also very much about national unity, whether we get it, see it, or not. How candidates respond to the threats from the South and the threats from within will determine our history as a nation. So too will candidate abilities to lead on these issues while still finding room for the other challenges that, while not as top of mind as before, remain of critical importance to different Canadians in different parts of our country. As you know, in Canadian elections, we don't vote for the Prime Minister. We vote for our local candidate, the representative of a political party. And the party with the most MPs, seats in the House of Commons, wins power, with its leader becoming the Prime Minister. And that's all true on paper, but in reality, the leaders do matter. In particular, two leaders matter a lot. Pierre Poilievre and Mark Carney, because one of these two men will go on to become Canada's next Prime Minister. You see, even if we don't vote for them directly, like America does for their president, the leaders of our major political parties do influence how we vote. Think about it. In the Canadian Rockies, we know grizzlies are the top of the food chain. We know they govern this ecosystem. But their ability to govern has a lot more to do with, say, this grizzly than it does with, say, this one. Why? The cult of personality. In Mount Robson, it's these two bears. In Banff, it's the boss. They're the prime ministers of their territory. How they act, where they feed, what direction they take, that dictates how all grizzlies function within the ecosystem. If the boss's personality isn't, that of a boss, then there would be many other contenders for the throne and the entire complexion of the ecosystem would change. In other words, how bears act influences how all other members of their species act. Canadian politics is no different. The leaders of our political parties have an outsized say in the movements they head up. The political apparatus, after all, is deeply loyal to the leader. And that's especially true when the leader wins a mandate from the party like Pierre Poilievre and Mark Carney did. Mark Carney isn't Justin Trudeau. He's an economist by training, having served as the Governor of the Bank of Canada and the Governor of the Bank of England. Serious jobs that often require a centrist outlook, but the party Carney won the right to lead, the Liberals, hasn't been seen as centrist or economically focused for some time. But he's changing that. Even though Carney is leading a Liberal team made up of many of the same candidates that were part of Trudeau's left-leaning Liberal governments for the past decade, no one doubts that the Liberals have changed gears and are embracing Carney's decidedly more centrist vision. Why? Again, it's the cult of the leader. A resounding victory, like Carney's, plus the power that comes with being the leader of the party, has allowed Carney to shape Liberals in his image and have them embrace his vision. On the Conservative side, the story is similar. Aaron O'Toole led the Conservatives in the last federal election campaign, embracing centrist or what's known as red Tory policies. He lost that election and was ousted by Pierre Poilievre, who promised to be a what you see is what you get leader. And he's delivered. Promising to axe the tax, build the homes, and stop the crime, Poilievre has focused on bread-and-butter conservative policies while nodding to his more populist base by pledging to defund the CBC, protect hunter rights, and ban government participation in the World Economic Forum. And to draw a clear distinction between the Tories and the Liberals, he's even worked to frame his opponents, labeling his chief rival carbon tax Carney. One problem. Though he's not Donald Trump, not even close, he sometimes sounds a little Trump-ish, or at least a bit like a populist. And that's hurt Poilievre's momentum and poll numbers to start the campaign. But as we've discussed before, campaigns matter, and each leader will work hard to wrestle back or retain momentum, putting forward ideas and candidates they hope will win over enough voters to allow them to gain power. Oh, and speaking of power, you're probably wondering, what happens if there's a crisis with America during the campaign itself? Well, Prime Minister Mark Carney will step right up thanks to the Caretaker Convention. Just like the past few months while Parliament was prorogued, Prime Minister Carney and his cabinet retain their full authority to oversee the executive branch of government. This means, in essence, they have the ability to make decisions that our Constitution legally grants them the authority to make. Now, the caretaker part of the Caretaker Convention does dictate that during an election, the executive shouldn't act as if it's business as usual. But the Caretaker Convention language is vague, and that's intentional. If Canada were to face a true existential emergency during this election campaign, our previously elected leaders are still the legal, valid, democratically elected decision makers empowered by our Constitution to govern the nation and respond to the crisis. Now, in reality, decisions will be limited to areas of broad-based public interest. But if you're wondering why one candidate, Carney, and not the other, Poilievre, is engaging in dialogue with President Trump during the campaign, this is why. The more you know. And now you know a lot more about this race, how it works, who is running, what each party stands for, and what's at stake in this election. But here's the most important thing that you must know. Every vote matters. Some ridings are decided by single votes and require judicial recounts to determine the winner. And even in ridings where results are a foregone conclusion, the down-ballot results help parties determine where they should allocate resources in future elections. Vote totals also tell the winning candidates what slate of policies are the most popular, in which neighborhoods or parts of their riding. That informs how boldly they'll advocate for specific ideas, when they move on from being one party's election candidate to being an MP who must represent all citizens in their riding, including those who didn't vote for them. Plus, people died for our democracy, for the right to vote. And with rights come responsibilities. Democracy is precious and increasingly fragile. Voting, when of age, is the least we can do to honor those who have served and died, and do our part to uphold our democracy, our most precious gift, one we mustn't squander.